Tonight, you have come to a place where nothing is asked of you. You do not need to be perfect. You do not need to be calm, and you do not need to try to fall asleep. All you need to do is breathe softly, slowly, and let this night unfold around you like a gentle robe of silence. The quiet path is not a road you must walk. It is the space that opens when you stop trying to go anywhere at all. Here you will hear stories told like whispers, each one carrying a little piece of stillness, a gentle rhythm to guide your heart home. As you listen, let the words move through you, like the wind moves through bamboo, quiet, unforced, free. If this place feels like rest, if these moments feel like warmth returning to your breath, then let this be your refuge. You can come back here any night to breathe, to heal, to simply be. And if you wish to walk with us again, gently press subscribe and let your evenings begin with peace. Now close your eyes. The journey into stillness begins. And now, as the last note of silence fades, let us take the first gentle step into the night's journey. Imagine the sound of water moving through stone, not rushing, not lost, simply finding its way. Somewhere in that rhythm lies our first story. A river, restless and alive, that once believed peace could only be found when it reached the sea. But tonight, it will learn something different, that even flowing water can rest, that even movement can be stillness. Close your eyes and listen. Feel the breath move like a current through you, steady and kind. The story begins where the river slows, where light and shadow meet, and where every sound becomes a quiet prayer. This is the first path, the river that learned to rest. Evening settled over the valley, as if the sky were laying a cool palm on a warm forehead, and the last light gathered itself along the ridge like a thin thread, not yet ready to be snapped. The river could feel it, not by sight, because a river does not have eyes, but by the temperature of stone, and reed, by the change in the posture of birds, by the way midges lifted and fell in a slower, looser choreography. All day, it had hurried itself between boulders and root-tangled banks, convinced, as always, that the purpose of water is to arrive. It had worn its impatience like foam, tossing small white rages against anything that stood in its way. When it leapt a ledge, it called that progress. When it slid across gravel and dragged pieces of mountain with it, it called that strength. The river had inherited many names for speed and almost none for quiet. It had been taught by storm and thaw and the long shout of winter's melt that to be alive is to go. But tonight, even the swiftest places began to soften, and the river felt a question opening inside it, like a cave lit from far within. What if arriving is not the point? What if the point is how the water holds the shape of the world while remaining itself? On the west bank, an old willow leaned with the tired elegance of a dancer after the last bough, its roots crocheting the soil into a kind of lace. From those roots, a damp wisdom seeped into the passing current. The willow had watched many seasons and did not speak quickly. Beneath it, a small eddy formed. Each evening, a circular breath, where leaves did not decide too soon which direction mattered. The river always felt that eddy as a delay, a hesitation, a spot where the body of water forgot its mission and curled back to look at itself. It would shoulder against the willow's patience and move on, pleased to feel the thrum of distance under its skin. But tonight, the eddy widened like the pupil of a resting animal. A single yellow leaf, the size of a child's palm, spun there without argument. The river could not help noticing that the leaf did not seem trapped. It did not seem lost. It seemed to be learning the choreography of staying, which in its quiet way is also a kind of travel. Upstream in a narrow neck between black-shouldered rocks, a heron stood so still that time put its hand on the bird and forgot to count. The heron understood the river better than the river understood itself, for the bird was a ledger of both air and water, hunger and patience, winter and return. When the heron moved at last, it was a hinge more than a gesture, a soft opening of possibility that entered the surface without scaring it and came up with silver brightness between its mandibles. The river admired and envied this, to move so slowly that one's motion did not break the world, to be so patient that hunger and satisfaction were 2 pages pressed together in the same book. If the river had had a throat, it would have swallowed once and felt something unclench. If it had had a chest, it would have discovered that the breath it had been holding for 100 miles could finally be let go. Along the inner bend, a village lived low, and wood-smelling porches hung with wind chimes made from old keys and spoons, a dog dozing on the cool slate of a threshold, a bicycle leaning into its own shadow. A child named Mara liked to lie on her stomach at the very lip of the bank and let her fingers drink. She said the river's voice changed with the hour, that in the stern light of noon, it spoke like a teacher tapping the blackboard, and at twilight, it lowered itself into the soft register used by mothers when a fever drops. She said that if you closed your eyes and listened hard, you could hear where the water had been snow on the shoulders of the mountain ice, like spun glass across a meadow. 100 secret springs whispering their separate names. She said that you could also hear where the water was going, but only if you did not try to. The village adults smiled at her seriousness and let her speak, because sometimes truth needs a young mouth to pass through. Not far from Mara's porch, an old clockmaker had set a chair facing the river. The same chair he'd used for 6 summers, its paint worn away in 2 places where hands had rested during thought. He would hold a pocket watch close to his ear, feel the pulse of seconds argue with the shush of water, and find in their disagreement a third rhythm, the one used by people who are learning how to forgive. He had once been in love with precision, the tick that divides life into manageable coins. These days, he was more interested in the pauses, in the imperfect beats that let music into a life. Sometimes, he would slip a slow watch into his own pocket and refuse to correct it, walking the day it gave him, instead of the day everyone else agreed upon. He looked at the river and wondered what a slow river would feel like, what a river that refused to be hurried by gravity might teach the stones. Night came more fully, and with it the first breath of river fog, a white scarf thrown across dark shoulders. The frogs began their monosyllabic liturgy from the marsh beyond the cattails. Somewhere upstream, a fox crossed at the shallows and left a sentence of paw marks on the sandbar. In a kitchen with a single light, a woman rinsed a cup and set it mouth down to dry, then stood very still, with her hands in the air, as if listening to a word she had not yet learned how to pronounce. The word might have been rest. It might have been home. The window was open, and the curtains breathed with the same modest rise and fall that the river now found within itself. To breathe with a curtain, to find a sisterhood with simple cloth. This was the kind of humility the river had not practiced when it was young, and all its language was made of rushing. At a bend where the bank had slumped into a natural amphitheater, a smooth collection of stones received the evening's cool. The stones had a memory of heat summer suns stored inside them, like vows, but they also knew how to give back that warmth to whatever leaned close. The river went slower there, as if it too wished to be warmed. It allowed itself to be held by the shape of the basin, to find that being guided was not the same as being restrained. The stars stood on tiptoe in the sky and looked shyly at their reflections. Once the river had wanted those stars for itself, had reached with white fingers and broken them into glittering pieces. Tonight, it let them be whole. Tonight, it learned that sometimes To love a thing is to leave it uncollected. There was, of course, still a pull. The mountain does not apologize for leaning its shoulder against the back of the valley, and the valley does not apologize for tilting its chin toward the sea. Gravity was a kindness that a young river misread as command. Even now, the river felt that kindness draw along its ribs, encouraging a motion as old as the moon's instructions to the tide. But a soft rebellion had started the tenderest kind, not a refusal, only a revision. The river would go where it must go, but it would stop on the way to greet itself. It found shallow shelves of sand where the current could comb itself and rest like a traveler who learns to enjoy the roadside tea more than the destination city. It found pools beneath overhangs where trout wrote small, bright thoughts with their bodies, and it watched without needing to change a single letter. Someone had placed a simple wooden bench by the bridge. No plaque, no dedication, just 2 boards and 4 bolts, and enough quiet to make a ceremony of sitting. Mara's grandfather liked to sit there, hat in his lap, letting the river fill the places where words would have been. He had lost his wife in the winter, and for a while, everything that moved made him angry. The calendar, the sun across the floor, the neighbor boy growing taller by a shoe size each month. He needed stillness, but would not ask for it. He needed gentleness and could not recognize it. One evening, too tired to be proud, he sat and watched the river pretend to hold the bridge by its ankles. He saw how water became ribbon and then rope, and then mere light on a surface, the same body taking on 100 masks to fit the play. He did not forgive the world that night, but he let the world sit beside him, and that was the first stitch in a torn seam. When the wind came, and it did, because valleys are instruments, and the wind is the musician, who cannot help returning to touch the strings. The willow's whispers lifted, and the chimes across the porches took up a gentle argument about which note meant home. The river listened and noticed for the first time that it too made a music beyond the simple habit of noise. There was the low vowel where water met moss, the bright consonant when it licked a small stone, clean the sibilant sigh where reeds combed its hair, the quick laughter of gravel in a shallower run. It realized that to go more quietly was not to be silent. It was to hear itself as part of a choir in which nothing sang alone. A storm had been promised by the color of the noon sky, that peculiar bruised softness that appears in late summer when heat and hunger make sudden arrangements. By the time the first drops found their way through the maple leaves, the river had already widened its shoulders, to receive them. Old habit suggested celebration, the kind of wild youth the river remembered. Brown rush snapped branches, a gulping at the banks, like a giant finally offered a real meal. But the river tried something new. It took each drop the way a monk might take a bell's tone into his chest, not swallowing it whole, but letting it ring through. The surface stippled, then smoothed itself as if smoothing a child's hair. The rain grew steady, and the fog with it, and the night earned its name one slow breath at a time. The river did not become less itself. It became more at ease inside its own name. There are people who think that the river taught itself this, as if water can read. There are people who say the willow spoke to it, that old trees keep a school under their skirts for any creature that will listen, that patience is the alphabet there, and the only rule is to remain. There are people who insist that the heron's stillness infected the water like a benevolent fever. But Mara said simply that the river listened, that everything that wants to change must become a good listener first, and the river had finally learned to hold its ear to the stone. The clockmaker, who had made a career of counting, agreed. He said the world is always tapping its quiet metronome against our lives. What we call noise is often our own hurry applauding itself. He said it with a smile that reached the parts of his face where no smile had been seen in years. By midnight, the village had gone to the deeper rooms of sleep, where dreams fold their hands and wait to be noticed. The river went on, but not in the old way. A deer came to drink and did not flinch at its reflection. A bat traced a dark cursive in the air above and wrote the name of hunger and the name of satisfaction on the same line. In the little eddy near the willow, the yellow leaf surrendered its circumference to the claim of water, and without losing its leafness, became part of the whirl that knew how to stay. The leaf was not stuck, it was studying. The river watched with the kind of tenderness that arrives when one finally refuses to measure. To learn is to be willing to be briefly without a story. At first light, which is not light, but the rumor of it told by birds, a veil of blue loosened from the hilltops. The heron changed legs. The clockmaker came early to the bench and brought a cup steam leaning over the rim like a ghost deciding to be kind. Mara pulled her sleeves over her hands and pressed her knuckles to her mouth, a small, human way of holding so much softness in one place. The river considered the day ahead, the errands of wind, the footfalls of hikers on the bridge, the way sun would touch the shallows and turn them to coins, and it did not tense to meet any of it. It allowed the notion that there might be many seas, and none of them required its arrival. The path through the valley was not a chute, but a conversation, and the river, for the first time, answered without rushing. Later, when the sun had done its generous work, and the children were sent for supper, the river found the long quiet of afternoon, that sweet trough between brightnesses, and practiced the art of holding. It laid its body softly along the shore, where the roots of alder made small caves for minnows to hide, where dragonflies stitched green light to green light, where the earth breathed sweetness up in the smell of damp bark. It did not perform. It did not audition for the ocean. It felt how the shape of its bed was not a prison, but a cradle, and how the cradle's sway was the very motion it had always loved. It thought, if a river can be said to think that perhaps the sea is only the memory of a million cradles agreeing to rock in the same direction. Evening returned, as evenings do not, as a surprise, but as a fulfillment. And the river spoke to itself in the vocabulary it had learned: slow, brightness, patient dark, the generous vowel of a frog's, call breath in and breath out. Mara's grandfather stood from the bench more easily than he had sat down, and touched the top of the backrest with his palm, the human way of saying thank you to wood. He did not hurry across the bridge. He walked with the cadence that the river had taught that day, which is to say, with the cadence that had always been available and had only needed noticing. The chimes across the porches announced the minor ceremonies of supper, and smoke rose from a chimney like a prayer that had no requests left in it. And when night was finally itself again, whole and unafraid, the river kept the lesson the way water keeps anything, not by clenching, but by becoming the shape that can hold it. The current went on, because going on is what currents do. But inside the going, there was a resting, the way a hand can be open and still carry something precious. Stones slept easier. Fish dreamed less sharply. The willow, which had been teaching without intention, felt no pride. Only the old happiness of roots that know the strength of staying. The heron entered sleep, standing up a feat of balance that a young river would have mocked, and an older river now admired. If you had been there and trailed your fingers through the black silk of the surface, you would have felt it, that delicate revision in the story of forward, that willingness to be here without immediately turning here into there. If you had leaned close, you might have heard the smallest sentence spoken in a water voice: I am arriving as I go. And if you had been very quiet, the kind of quiet that might take a life to learn, you would have noticed that the sentence did not end. It simply widened until it was large enough to carry you too. The monk and the candlelight, Night had descended softly over the monastery, like a shawl drawn over tired shoulders, the air between the pine trunks carrying a scent of rain that never quite fell. From the open corridor of the eastern hall, a single flame trembled in the wind. A small candle placed in a brass holder, its edge worn smooth from years of being touched by the same pair of careful hands. The monk who tended it, named Jinan, had been lighting this same candle every evening for more than 40 years. He would rise from his wooden mat as the last birds quieted, carry the candle into the main hall, and place it on the stone before the great statue of the Buddha. He did not pray for anything. He did not ask that the world change or that his heart be steadied. He simply lit the flame and watched it breathe. When Jinan was young, he believed enlightenment would come like sunlight, sudden flooding undeniable. He imagined a brilliance that would burn away his confusion and leave behind something permanent, something pure. So he meditated with the intensity of someone trying to push a door open that was never locked. He fasted until he could hear his own pulse in his ears, walked barefoot until the soles of his feet hardened into maps of every stone in the mountain, and chanted until his voice was nothing but a ribbon of air. And yet, every evening, when he lit the candle, he saw the same thing, a small wavering flame that refused to stay still. He began to suspect that the candle was mocking him, a reminder that all light flickers, all knowing dances. The monastery stood halfway up the mountain, where clouds often stooped low enough to rest on the eaves. Sometimes the monks would wake to find the entire world wrapped in white. When this happened, Jinan liked to sit by the window and watch the fog roll through the courtyard like a slow tide. The world would disappear and return, disappear and return, as if even the mountain needed to practice letting go. The candle would still be burning beside him, its reflection trembling in the lacquered wood of the floor. Once during such a morning, the abbot, an old man with eyes that smiled even when his mouth did not, sat beside Jinan and said, "You are waiting for the light to stop moving. That is why you do not see it." For a long time after that, Jinan thought about what the abbot meant. He thought while sweeping the leaves that fell endlessly from the pine trees, while boiling rice, while cleaning the small altar in the meditation hall. He realized that even the dust returned each morning as faithfully as prayer, that the leaves he swept were not intrusions, but reminders that nothing stays finished. The world was constantly beginning again, and perhaps that was its way of bowing. The candlelight, too, was never still. Yet, it never vanished. Its trembling was its existence. Years passed. Jinen's hair turned the color of the ash that collected beneath the incense burners. The young monks began to call him Old Jinnen, though they still sought his help to patch their robes or steady their breathing during long meditations. He had grown quiet, not from weariness, but from the kind of peace that needs few words to explain itself. One winter, when the snow refused to stop and the roofs sagged under its weight, the candle would not light. The wax had cracked in the cold, the wick refused to catch. Jinen tried again and again until the matches were gone. For the first time in many years, the hall remained in darkness. He sat before the unlit candle and waited. The silence seemed to deepen, filling even the space where the flame would have been. The statue of the Buddha stood invisible in the dark, yet Jinen could feel its presence, not as a figure, but as warmth, faint and unmistakable. He realized then that the light had never truly come from the candle. The candle had only been a gesture, a reminder to look. The flame was in the act of tending itself in the small devotion repeated without reason. Outside, the wind began to hum through the bamboo grove. The sound was soft, like breath being shared between friends. Jinen closed his eyes. He felt the pulse of his own heartbeat, slow and round, and for a moment it aligned with the rhythm of the wind, the creak of the rafters, the almost sound of snow sliding from a branch. In that alignment, there was a kind of illumination, not bright, not blinding, but warm enough to see by. He smiled the way a child smiles when recognizing an old song. The next morning, when the other monks entered the hall, they found Jinen sitting still before the candle. The wick had somehow caught fire during the night. No one knew how, and no one asked. The flame burned steady and clear, and in its glow, Jinen's face looked younger, softened by something beyond rest. The abbot bowed deeply before him, though the old monk's eyes were closed. The candlelight moved slightly, with the draft painting the statue behind him in living gold. After that night, the monks continued to light the candle each evening. Some said the light never flickered again, but the younger ones, those who watched carefully, swore that it still trembled just enough to remind them that perfection is only a shadow cast by movement. They began to understand that stillness was not the absence of motion, but the acceptance of its rhythm. The candle burned, the wax melted, the light shifted, and in every flicker they saw the same teaching Jinen had spent his life seeking. And so the years went on. Travelers would sometimes stop at the monastery to rest. They would ask for blessings, and the monks would offer them tea and silence instead. When the travelers asked about the candle, one monk would say, "It reminds us to see even in darkness." Another might smile and answer, "It teaches that every light must bow." But the youngest monk, the one who cleaned the wax each morning, would simply whisper, "It's alive," and return to his work. Each evening, when the world quieted and the first stars blinked open above the pines, the candlelight would spill across the stone floor like a slow-moving river. The monks would sit, breathe, and let that small glow wash through them. Outside, wind and snow and time went on doing what they always did. But inside the hall, a single flame kept teaching that what trembles is not weak, that what flickers is not lost, and that sometimes the smallest light is enough to show the way home. The Pottery of Silence. In the western foothills, where the earth was red and soft underfoot, there lived an old potter named Akira. His workshop stood at the edge of a bamboo grove, a modest shelter of clay walls and thatched roof built not for profit, but for breath. The villagers often said that his pots were quieter than any others, not because they made no sound, but because somehow they carried silence inside them. When people placed water rice or flowers in his vessels, they swore the air around them grew still. Akira never explained his craft. He only smiled and said, "Clay remembers the hands that touch it, and silence remembers the heart that shapes it." Each morning before dawn, he would walk barefoot to the river that curved like a patient arm behind his home. He would kneel at its bank and gather handfuls of silt, feeling the mud cool and alive against his skin. It was the same river that had nourished his family for generations, though most of his kin had moved to the towns long ago. Akira stayed. He believed that clay was a kind of scripture written by the rain, each grain of earth a syllable, each droplet a mark of punctuation. As the first light unfurled behind the mountains, he would stand bow once to the water and carry the heavy bucket back through the mist. The workshop smelled of earth and ash. Inside, rows of finished pots lined the walls, some cracked, some perfect, all equal in his eyes. The kiln squatted in the corner like an old friend, its mouth dark and deep scarred from years of fire. Akira's wheel sat in the middle of the room, surrounded by small pools of dried slip and scattered shards, fragments of experiments, accidents, and quiet triumphs. When he sat at the wheel, he did not hum or chant, as others might. He simply breathed steady and slow, and the clay began to rise under his palms as though responding to something older than instruction. There was no pattern to his work, no rush to complete it. Sometimes he would shape a bowl and at the last moment collapse it gently back into formlessness. Sometimes he would leave a finished vase on the shelf for weeks before firing it, waiting until the day's wind felt right. The villagers thought this eccentric, but Akira only said that each pot had its own time to be born. He never named them, never priced them. Those who came to buy were told, "Take what calls to you, and leave what does not." Once, a traveling merchant stopped by and saw Akira at his wheel. The merchant watched the old man's hands, slow, circular, unhurried, as he coaxed a lump of clay into the shape of a vessel. "You could make a fortune in the city," the merchant said. "People there pay for art, not for patience." Akira paused, smiled, and kept turning the wheel. "Art is only patience, given form," he replied. "And fortune is only a fire that does not warm." The merchant frowned, thinking the potter a fool, but when he lifted one of the finished bowls, he felt an unfamiliar calm. He put it down gently, as if afraid to wake something sleeping inside. In the evenings, Akira would sit outside the workshop, his palms still smelling faintly of clay, and watch the moon rise above the grove. Sometimes children came to play near the path, laughing as they chased fireflies. He would greet them, then return his gaze to the kiln where faint threads of smoke curled upward, carrying the day's breath into the night. When the firing was done, he would open the kiln's mouth with reverence, as though unwrapping a long-kept secret. Some pots emerged flawless, their surfaces smooth as river stones. Others had split, warped, or darkened into unpredictable hues. Akira treated them all the same, running his thumb along each crack, whispering softly, as if consoling an old friend. One autumn evening, a storm rolled in from the coast. The wind pushed through the grove with a low growl, and rain hammered the roof like impatient knuckles. Akira worked through the night, feeding the fire with branches, trying to keep the heat steady. Near dawn, lightning flashed, and the kiln shuddered. The arch above the opening cracked, and one side collapsed inward. The fire hissed smoke poured out, and in a moment, months of careful shaping turned to ruin. When morning came, Akira sat among the ashes. His hands blackened, the smell of burnt clay hanging thick in the air. The neighbors came running, offering help, but he only shook his head. "It was time," he said simply. "The fire has its own practice." For several days, he did not rebuild. He swept the shards into a corner and left the workshop open to the wind. Each dawn he walked to the river, but did not gather clay. He sat by the bank and watched the water carry away leaves and foam, letting its movement teach him something he could not yet name. One morning, a small boy from the village approached him, holding a broken shard he had found near the kiln. "It's still beautiful," the boy said. Akira took it, turned it over in his hands, and saw the thin line where the glaze had cracked into a pattern of delicate veins. It looked like frost, or like the wrinkles on his own skin. He smiled. "Yes," he whispered, "it's still breathing." The next day, he began again. He rebuilt the kiln stone by stone, slower this time, as if listening to the rhythm of the earth beneath him. When the first pot of the new season emerged, it was imperfect. One side slightly heavier, the rim uneven. Akira placed it on the shelf and did not correct it. That night, as he sat before the fire, he realized that the silence in the room had changed. It was no longer empty. It had shape, texture, warmth. It was the same silence that had existed between the strikes of thunder during the storm, the silence that survives even when everything breaks. As the years deepened, so did his quiet. Travelers came and went. Some took his pots, others took only the memory of watching him work. Once a young woman asked if she could learn from him. He nodded and gave her a small lump of clay. "Shape it as you breathe," he told her. She tried for hours, her bowl collapsing again and again. Frustrated, she said, "It won't hold." Akira replied, "Then let it teach you what does." She looked at him, confused, but stayed. In time, her bowls grew steadier, her breath slower. When she left months later, she carried nothing with her except a cracked pot. Years afterward, she sent a letter from a faraway town saying that she still used that pot to hold her morning tea, and that each crack reminded her to be kind to herself. When Akira's hands finally trembled too much to shape the clay, he stopped working, but not watching. He would sit near the wheel, eyes half closed, and listen to the new apprentices turning it. Sometimes he could tell from the rhythm alone who was fighting the clay and who was listening to it. In those moments, he felt his own life mirrored in their work. The restless beginnings, the long practice of stillness, the cracks that let light in. One evening in late winter, as the sun sank behind the grove, Akira felt the air grow unusually calm. He sat before the kiln one last time, the fire burning low. The walls glowed like the inside of an orange, and shadows of the bamboo swayed gently across the floor. He reached for a small pot he had made years ago, a simple vessel with a chip along the rim. He turned it in his hands, tracing the imperfection, as though reading a prayer written long ago. "You've outlived me," he said, softly, smiling. He set it down, leaned back, and let the warmth of the fire settle over him. When the apprentices found him the next morning, he was still seated by the kiln, his face serene, the pot resting beside him. They said the workshop felt different, lighter, like a sigh released after holding too long. They lit incense and opened the shutters, letting the morning light spill across the shelves. Outside, the river shimmered under the dawn. One of the younger students walked to the bank and filled a small bowl with water, then poured it slowly over the old wheel. The wood soaked it in like memory. In the years that followed, people still spoke of Akira's silence. They said it was not the kind that isolates, but the kind that listens. His pots were scattered across villages and cities, in temples, in kitchens, in quiet corners of homes. Many had chipped, many had cracked, yet none were discarded. Those who used them said the vessels seemed to breathe, to remind them of the hands that shaped them and the fire that tested them. They said that if you held one close and listened long enough, you could hear something faint but unmistakable. The hum of the wheel, turning the rhythm of a heart steady as clay, the sound of silence learning to speak. And the river still passed behind the old workshop, gathering the stories of the land and carrying them onward. Sometimes, on still nights, when the moon floated low and the world held its breath, the villagers swore they saw the reflection of an old man sitting by the kiln hands, folded in his lap, a faint smile across his face. The smoke from the fire curled upward in a slow, unbroken line, disappearing into the sky as though returning to its first form: breath, warmth, and the gentle sound of earth remembering itself. Giant bridge between winds. At the far edge of a small valley where two hills leaned toward one another, like old friends sharing a secret, there was a bridge made of wood and stone. It wasn't grand, only wide enough for a cart and a walking man to pass side by side. But it had stood for nearly 100 years, held together by patience more than mortar. Beneath it flowed a narrow river that murmured like a half-remembered prayer, changing its tone with every season. In spring it laughed, in summer it hummed, in winter it spoke in whispers only the frost could understand, and the bridge, faithful and quiet, listened. When the wind passed through the valley, it always stopped to greet the bridge. No one knew why. Maybe the beams made a certain sound. Maybe the way the boards loosened slightly over time created a music that pleased it. Travelers crossing often heard it too, a low bending note, like the sound of a flute played under a blanket. To most, it was only noise. But to those who lingered, to shepherds, to children, to the occasional monk, the sound felt alive, as if the bridge was speaking to the wind, and the wind was answering back. In a small house near the northern hill lived a carpenter named Sora. He was the third generation of bridge keepers, a quiet man with eyes that reflected the same gray as river stone. Every month, he came to mend the planks and oil the joints, humming to himself as he worked. His father had told him, "The bridge breathes just as we do. When it creaks, it isn't breaking, it's remembering." Sora believed that. He treated every nail, every knot in the wood as part of something living. On windy days, he would sit on the bridge with his legs dangling over the side and listen. The boards trembled lightly beneath him, and the ropes hummed. He used to think the wind was trying to tear the bridge apart, but the longer he listened, the more it sounded like two old friends talking across distance. One evening, he whispered, "Are you arguing or laughing?" The bridge gave a long, groaning sigh in reply, and a gust lifted the hair from his forehead like an unseen hand. Years passed this way, the bridge speaking, the wind answering, and Sora mending both. One autumn morning, after a storm that had bent the trees to their knees, he found one of the main beams cracked near the southern side. The bridge could still stand, but it sang differently. Now, its tone lower, more sorrowful. Sora ran his palm over the break and felt the splintered fibers, like ribs after coughing. He went to fetch his tools, but when he returned, he didn't begin work right away. He stood there, listening to the new sound. It wasn't broken, he thought. It was simply changed. That night, Sora dreamed of his father. They were sitting together on the bridge, the sky full of dark clouds and the wind moving through them like a soft tide. His father said, "When wood ages, it stops fighting the wind. It learns to bend. When men age, they must learn the same." Then he reached down, pressed his palm to the boards, and the bridge hummed like a bowl struck by a bell. Sora woke before dawn, the dream still ringing in his chest. In the following weeks, he worked slowly, replacing the broken beam, not with new timber, but with a piece salvaged from the same forest where the bridge's first trees had grown. The wood was weathered gray, soft around the edges. It carried the scent of years. As he fitted it into place, he whispered, "Let this be part of your breath, old friend." When the next wind came, the bridge sang again. Not the same tune as before, but one that carried the echo of the old and the freshness of the new woven together, like two threads that had finally stopped pulling apart. Travelers began to notice the sound too. Some said it reminded them of waves, Others said it sounded like voices calling each other's names across a long distance. A blind monk once crossed at dusk and paused halfway, his hand resting on the rail. "Ah," he murmured, "I know this sound. It's the sound of something learning to stay." Then he smiled and walked on the bridge, trembling gently beneath his bare feet. Seasons moved like slow breaths. The hills browned, then greened again. Sora grew older, his hair thinning, his steps slower. He began bringing his granddaughter, Hana, to the bridge. She would skip across it, counting the boards aloud, her laughter catching the wind and carrying downstream. Sometimes she asked grandfather, "Why does the bridge sing?" He would answer, "Because it listens to the wind." And when she tilted her head, confused, he would add, "Listening is also a kind of music." One evening in late spring, the wind came differently, heavy, low, almost like a sigh from the earth itself. The bridge groaned more than usual, and Hana clung to her grandfather's sleeve. "It's angry," she said. Sora shook his head. "No, it's just remembering something deep." He stood there for a long while, feeling the boards move underfoot. The ropes tug the air shift around them. Then, almost to himself, he whispered, "We all tremble when we remember." That night, rain came hard and cold. The river swelled and clawed at the banks, the bridge swaying in its sleep. Sora stayed awake, watching from his window as lightning split the sky. In the early hours when the storm eased, he went out with a lantern. The air was thick with mist, and the world smelled of soaked earth and pine. The bridge still stood scarred, wet, but breathing. When he stepped onto it, the boards groaned softly beneath his weight. He knelt and pressed his ear to the wood. There was no melody, only the faint heartbeat of water below. As dawn broke, the clouds parted, and a single beam of light fell across the river. In that light, Sora saw droplets clinging to the ropes, each one trembling with the smallest gust. The bridge shimmered like a stringed instrument being tuned by invisible fingers. He smiled. Still singing, he murmured and went home to rest. Years folded into one another, the way streams fold into rivers, quietly, without ceremony. Sora passed away one autumn evening, sitting beside the window that faced the bridge. Hana found him there the next morning, his hands resting in his lap, his face turned toward the valley, as if still listening. The villagers said the wind that day was unlike any other. It blew soft but strong, crossing the bridge in long, even breaths that sounded almost human. Some swore they heard a voice among the gusts, low and kind, saying thank you. Hannah grew into a woman and took over her grandfather's task. She learned the feel of the bridge beneath her feet, where the boards were soft, where the nails whispered, where the wind always touched first. She did not change much, only tended what was there the way Sora had taught her. Sometimes, when the valley grew quiet, she would sit on the rail and hum to herself, and the bridge would hum back a harmony as old as patience. On the anniversary of her grandfather's death, Hannah brought a small chime and hung it from the central beam. The wind caught it immediately, ringing a clear, delicate tone that seemed to drift forever. From that day on, whenever someone crossed the bridge, they heard not one sound, but many. The wooden sighs, the rope's low hum, and the chime's voice weaving between them. It was as if the bridge had learned a new language, one part sorrow, one part gratitude, and all of it alive. Travelers who crossed in silence sometimes found themselves slowing down, listening without meaning to. Some wept without knowing why. Others left offerings of flour, a coin, a folded note on the railing. They said the bridge carried their thoughts to the wind, and the wind carried them on. No one knew where to. One summer evening, a monk from the southern monastery stopped to rest at the bridge. Hannah greeted him and offered tea. As they drank, the wind rose and the chime began to sing. The monk closed his eyes and smiled. "This bridge has no walls," he said softly. "It joins not only the hills, but also what is seen and unseen." Hannah nodded, though she didn't fully understand. "It feels alive," she said. "It is," the monk replied. "Everything that listens long enough becomes alive." Years later, when Hannah herself had grown gray, the bridge still stood. The river had carved its course deeper, the hills greener from countless rains. One morning, children from the village found her sitting at the center of the bridge, eyes closed, hands folded in her lap. The chime above her swayed gently, singing to the wind. They called to her, but she didn't move. Her face, like her grandfather's, was turned toward the valley, serene and unafraid. They buried her beneath the willow tree near the north bank, where she had once played as a child. After her passing, the bridge took on a new tone, softer, fuller, like a voice aged by kindness. The villagers began to call it the bridge between winds. They said that on certain nights, when the moon sat low and the valley was utterly still, you could hear two voices mingling in the air, one deep and patient, the other light and clear, speaking in the language of wind and wood. And if you listened long enough, you would understand that they were not two at all, but one, the sound of the world, remembering how to rest, how to endure, and how to sing. The bridge remains there, even now, weathered but standing. The chime still rings when the breeze moves through the boards, still hum when footsteps cross. Travelers who pause halfway feel something shift inside them. Not revelation, not magic, just a small quiet, the kind that follows understanding. They often look up, smile at the open sky, and whisper a thank you they cannot explain. Then they walk on lighter than before the wind behind them, carrying their breath across the valley. A bridge itself, invisible but unbroken between all things that listen and all things that pass. The girl who waited for rain. The desert had its own kind of music, a silence so deep that every sound became an event. When the wind moved, it carried not just dust, but memory. And when it stopped, the world seemed to listen to itself breathing. In that wide, amber land, where no tree grew taller than a man's shoulders, a small village clung to the edges of an ancient dry riverbed. The people called it the river that forgot. Once long ago, it had carried monsoon waters across the plains, feeding palms and dates and laughter. But the river had grown tired, they said, or perhaps the clouds had simply lost their way. Either way, the bed lay empty, now cracked, pale, stretching like a scar through the sand. In this village lived a girl named Amara. She was small, thin, and always barefoot, her feet stained with dust the color of faded gold. Each morning, she would climb the ridge beyond her mother's garden and stare at the horizon, where the heat shimmered like a mirage, pretending to be a sea. She waited for rain the way others waited for letters, with a hope both unreasonable and stubborn. "It will come," she told her mother one morning as they ground grain together. Her mother smiled without answering. The desert had taught her not to argue with faith. Amara had never seen rain, not once in her 12 years. The stories she knew of it came from her grandfather, who sat beneath the shade of the one surviving acacia tree and spoke of it as though it were a friend who had gone away. "Rain smells like forgiveness," he used to say. "It sounds like 1,000 hands clapping softly for the earth." His voice would trail off, and Amara would close her eyes, imagining drops the size of coins falling on her arms, her hair, her tongue. She had never known coolness, only degrees of warmth, dawn warmth, noon warmth, the dying warmth of dusk, each one a different flavor of fire. At night, she dreamed of clouds. They came as animals, white and slow, grazing across the sky. Sometimes they had voices. Sometimes they simply looked down and drifted away. When she woke, her skin always felt dry, and the clay cup beside her bed empty, even if she remembered filling it the night before. She began to think that dreams were how the rain spoke when it could not find a way to fall. The villagers had learned to live with thirst. They dug deep wells that offered only brackish water, traded salt and dates for small sacks of grain brought from far towns. But each year grew harder, and the ground, like an old man's hand, cracked deeper. Still, Amara waited. She collected stones from the riverbed and built small towers along its center, marking where she imagined the water would first return. Some of the boys laughed at her, but she didn't mind. Every time the wind knocked one of her towers over, she rebuilt it higher. One afternoon, an old monk passed through the village on his way to the mountains. His robe was the color of dusk, and his sandals were worn so thin they seemed made of shadow. Amara followed him as he walked along the dry river, his staff leaving small circles in the dust. "Sir," she said shyly, "will the rain come soon?" The monk stopped and looked at her for a long moment. His face was lined not with worry, but with distance, as if he carried too many horizons in his eyes. "The rain comes," he said, "when the sky learns to listen." Amara frowned, but the sky doesn't have ears. He smiled. Neither does the heart, and yet it hears everything. Then he continued walking until the heat swallowed him. That night, Amara lay awake, listening not for rain, but for something beneath the quiet. She heard the wind breathing through the cracks in the roof, the faint scrape of her mother turning in sleep, the creak of wood as it cooled from the day's heat. Each sound felt like a drop, invisible, but falling somewhere inside her. She closed her eyes and whispered to the darkness, "If you are listening, I am too." Days passed. The sky remained blank, but something in her waiting began to change. She no longer stared at the horizon. She began to watch the ground, the way the sand moved when lizards ran across it, the way the shadows of clouds, rare and fleeting, cooled the earth for only a few heartbeats before vanishing. She began to feel that the world was not dry at all, only hidden, that the water still lived underneath, patient as breath. One morning, she woke before dawn and went to the riverbed. The air was cool, carrying a scent she didn't recognize, something faintly metallic, like the inside of a dream. She knelt and touched the ground. It felt different. Not soft, not wet, but waiting. She pressed her ear to the earth. There was a sound there, faint as a heartbeat. It wasn't water, not yet. It was something like promise. She began to visit that place each day at the same hour, sitting in silence, her palms resting on the soil. Sometimes she closed her eyes and breathed with the earth. Sometimes she whispered stories to it, of the clouds she'd seen, in dreams of her grandfather's laughter, of the monk who said the sky must learn to listen. She didn't know if anyone heard. But the longer she sat, the more she felt the world breathing with her. As weeks passed, the villagers noticed small changes. The air in the mornings carried a coolness that hadn't been there before. Ants began to build taller mounds, sealing their tunnels carefully. Birds, long absent, returned in pairs, their wings glinting like shards of light. A sign said the elders, though none dared hope aloud. Then, one afternoon, as Amara sat by the riverbed, a shadow crossed the sun. She looked up. The sky was no longer a single color. It was layered, streaked with gray, heavy, and strange. The wind shifted, carrying a smell that made her chest ache, wet stone leaf thunder. Her hands trembled. She stood. The air thickened around her, pressing close like a held breath. And then a sound she had never heard before, a low, rolling voice that came from everywhere and nowhere. The first drop struck her forehead, cool and shocking, followed by another and another. She laughed, a wild, surprised sound that startled even herself, and lifted her face. The rain came harder, striking the sand, darkening it, sending small streams racing toward the old towers of stone she had built. They toppled and melted into the mud, but she didn't care. The air filled with the scent of life waking up. She danced, arms open, water running down her face, her hair, her neck. Around her, the villagers ran from their houses, shouting, laughing, crying. The desert, for a few hours, remembered how to sing. By nightfall, the rain slowed, then stopped. The stars returned bright and wet, their reflections trembling in every puddle. The earth steamed softly, sighing. Amara lay down in the mud, feeling the warmth of it beneath her. She whispered, "Thank you." And in the silence that followed, she could have sworn she heard the sky whisper back. The next morning, the village was transformed. Tiny shoots of green peeked from the cracks. The air was gentle, sweet. The old acacia tree had opened its first flowers in years. People spoke in quiet voices, as if afraid to wake something sleeping. The riverbed still held only a thin ribbon of water, but it was enough. It moved, glinting in the sun, slow and deliberate, like a thought finding its way home. Amara spent every morning by the water's edge. She no longer waited. She listened. Sometimes she dipped her hands in the shallow stream and watched the ripples fade. She understood now what the monk had meant. The sky had not brought the rain. It had answered the listening that had already begun below. Years passed. The rains came and went, sometimes plentiful, sometimes scarce. The river never returned to its old strength, but it never left completely either. The villagers learned to live with its rhythm, to take what was given, to wait when it paused. Amara grew into a woman, her hair long and dark, her eyes bright with the calm of those who have known both thirst and blessing. Travelers sometimes came through the valley and asked her, "When will it rain again?" She would smile, place a hand on the earth, and say, "It's already raining, if you listen closely." Some thought her mad. Others stayed a while and began to hear it too. The soft hum beneath the wind, the sigh between heartbeats, the unseen rain that falls even on dry days. In the end, when her hair turned silver and her hands grew thin, Amara still walked each dawn to the riverbed. She would sit in the same place where she had once waited as a child and close her eyes. Those who passed by said that when the wind blew across the sand, it made a sound like distant water, a sound that rose and fell with her breathing. They said that even on days when the sky was empty, the air around her seemed moist, as if carrying memory. One night, during the season of silence, when clouds do not come and the stars burn close, she fell asleep by the river and did not wake again. The next morning, the villagers found her sitting upright, her hands folded in her lap, her face turned toward the horizon. There was a faint smile on her lips, and the sand beneath her feet was darker than the rest, as though touched by dew. After her passing, the desert remained quiet for many months. Then, on a dawn thick with haze, a gentle drizzle began, not enough to flood, only enough to blur the edges of the stones, to soften the air. The rain fell for a single hour, then stopped. When the sun rose, a faint rainbow arched over the valley, its colors pale and kind. The villagers said it was Amara's voice, still waiting, still listening. And even now, when travelers cross that plain, they sometimes pause. The ground is cracked, the air dry, but in the distance, they swear they can hear a soft rhythm, like rain on a window, like water remembering its path. They do not know whether it comes from the sky or from within themselves, but they always leave quieter than they arrived, their steps lighter, as though some old thirst inside them had been gently met. For the desert, like the heart, never truly forgets water. It only learns to wait with more grace. And every silence, if you listen long enough, becomes the sound of rain preparing to return. The lamp by the window in a small town by the edge of a quiet lake stood an old wooden house with windows that had grown cloudy from years of breath and rain. Inside, on a narrow table facing the water, there lived a lamp, not grand, not ornate, just a simple brass lamp with a glass shade the color of old honey. Its flame was small, but steady, and each evening, as dusk began to walk softly down the streets, the woman who lived in the house would strike a match, lean close, and whisper, "There you are." Then the lamp would bloom with light, and the room would take its first slow breath of night. Her name was Ilara. She lived alone. Though the quiet in her house was not empty, but companioned by the creak of wood, the ticking of an unseen clock, the lake wind brushing the curtains. Years ago, she had shared the space with another soul, a man who loved to read under the same lamp. He used to sit by the window, the light falling over his pages, while she embroidered beside him. Their silence had been warm, then filled with the ease of two people who no longer needed to fill the air with words. But one winter, he fell ill, and by the time the spring thaw arrived, the chair by the window was empty. The lamp, however, stayed. Ilara could not bring herself to put it away. It was the only thing that still remembered his shadow. At first, she lit it every night out of habit, waiting for the shape of his face to appear in the glow, for the warmth to feel shared again. It never did. The light filled the room, but not the ache. Yet over the months, she noticed something gentle when she sat near the lamp. Her breathing slowed, and the noise of her thoughts thinned until only one remained, the quiet one that said, "Stay." The lamp had stopped being a memorial. It had become a kind of teacher. Ilara began to speak to it sometimes, not as if it could answer, but as if it was listening. "It's cold tonight," she would say, or, "Do you remember the sound of the rain that winter?" The lamp would say nothing, of course, but its light would flicker in a way that looked almost like nodding. When storms came and wind rattled the shutters, she would move it closer to the center of the room, shielding the flame with her hand. She had learned to protect what was small and bright because she had learned what it was to lose what could not be replaced. The townspeople knew her as the woman with the light. Travelers walking along the lake at night said they could see it from far away, a golden point steady among the shifting dark. Fishermen used it as a guide on foggy mornings. Lovers strolling by the shore whispered that the lamp watched over them. Elara never meant to become a beacon, but perhaps that is what grief does when it softens. It begins to glow. One evening in late autumn, a knock came at her door. When she opened it, a boy stood there, soaked from the rain, holding a broken lantern. "The wind took it," he said shyly, "and I can't find my way home." Elara smiled and invited him in. She dried his hair by the fire and poured him warm milk. The boy stared at the lamp on the table, its flame steady in the stormlight. "Why do you keep it burning?" he asked. She paused. "Because the night is longer than we think," she said, softly. "And sometimes we must remind it that we are still here." When the rain stopped, she handed the boy her own lamp to light his way. "Take it," she said, "and bring it back when the morning knows your name again." He hesitated, then nodded. The next day, he returned the lamp unharmed, its wick clean. "It didn't go out," he said proudly. Elara smiled. "Then you've learned what it knows." From that day on, he came often to fetch water, to listen to stories, to help polish the brass when it dulled. She taught him how to tend a flame, how to trim the wick so it burns neither too bright nor too dim, how to cup one's hand around the light when wind passes through. Winter crept in quietly that year. Snow layered itself along the window frame, turning the world into silence. The lake froze, smooth, a mirror that reflected the moon in unbroken stillness. Elara grew older, her hair whitening like frost along the eaves. Some nights she sat so still that the lamp's flame seemed to breathe for her. It flickered gently, throwing small halos across the walls, turning the simplest things, a book, a cup, a teapot, into sacred shapes. She had stopped thinking of the lamp as an object. It had become an hour, a ritual, a way of listening. Sometimes she imagined that the light was speaking not in words, but in warmth, saying, "You have not disappeared. You are still lighted from within." On other nights, when the boy, now grown taller, came to visit, he would find her asleep in the chair by the window, her hand resting loosely near the base of the lamp. He would sit quietly and read the way her husband once had, until dawn came to turn the light pale. One morning, as spring returned and the snow melted into silver threads along the gutters, Elara woke with a feeling she could not name. The air seemed different, lighter, expectant. She stood, walked to the window, and saw fog rising off the lake. The reflection of the lamp in the glass shimmered beside her own face. For a long time, she watched the two images, hers and the lamp's side by side, one fading as the other brightened. "We've been here a long time," she whispered. The light flickered as if in agreement. That evening, she lit it one last time. The boy was away helping his family on the far side of town, and the house was still. She sat by the window and watched the flame dance. Outside, night gathered gently over the lake, and the first stars began to blink awake. Elara thought of her husband, of the years folded behind her like the pages of a red book, of the quiet that had once felt heavy and now felt kind. "If you are still out there," she murmured, "this light will find you." Hours passed. The flame grew smaller, leaning toward the last breath of its wick. Elara leaned back in her chair, eyes half closed, her hand resting on the table. When the wick finally surrendered, the smoke rose in a single graceful thread, a prayer written in air. The next morning, the boy returned. The door was unlocked, the room cool, the lamp dark. Elara sat as if asleep, her head tilted slightly toward the window. He knew before he touched her shoulder that she was gone, but the peace in her face made him smile through the ache. He turned toward the table and looked at the lamp. Without thinking, he struck a match and lit it again. The flame rose steady warm. "There you are," he whispered, echoing her voice. From that night on, the boy, now a man, kept the lamp in his own home. He placed it by his window and lit it each evening the same way she had. Sometimes travelers still saw the glow across the water, and though they didn't know whose hand tended it, they said the light felt familiar, gentle, patient, alive. And when storms swept through the valley, the lamp always stayed lit, its flame leaning and swaying, but never bowing out. Years later, when the man had grown old, his granddaughter asked grandfather, "Who lives in that light?" He smiled and said, "Everyone who has ever learned to stay." And so, the lamp by the window burned on through seasons, through generations, through all the nights that came. It no longer belonged to anyone, nor to the house, nor even to the town. It belonged to the act of keeping. It was what remained when loss learned how to glow. Those who passed the lake late at night said the lamp's reflection in the water never trembled, not even when the wind rose. They said that if you stood long enough, you could see two lights instead of one in the window, one floating gently on the lake's surface like a soul, and its memory meeting again in perfect stillness. And though no one could prove it, many believed that the lamp's flame was never truly fire at all. But the quiet made visible the gentle golden heartbeat of a woman who had once whispered to the night, "There you are," and in doing so, had taught it how to see. The cloud that fell softly The morning began without sound, as if the world had not yet decided to wake. Over the desert plain, light came slow, a pale hush spreading across sand and stone. The air trembled faintly, carrying the promise of heat, but for now, it was cool, almost tender. Above that stillness floated a single cloud, small and round-edged, like a thought that had forgotten where it was going. It had drifted for days across the empty country, pushed by winds that did not care for direction, only movement. The cloud had seen mountains whose shadows swallowed rivers, had brushed the tops of forests thick as whispers had crossed towns where children pointed and called it names that dissolved before reaching the sky. Yet all the while, it had never rained. It was not that the cloud refused, it simply did not know how. Each time it gathered itself into weight, it grew afraid. The falling looked like ending, and the cloud loved being light. It loved the way sunlight passed through its edges and made it glow from within the way birds cut clean through it without asking permission, the way the horizon widened beneath its shadow. Falling meant changing, and change meant loss. So the cloud learned to drift. Far below, at the edge of the desert, lay a monastery carved into red rock, its walls the color of rusted dawn. The monks there rose before first light to sweep the courtyard and pour water over the dusty steps, a ritual of humility more than cleanliness. They moved quietly, their robes brushing the ground like soft wind over dry grass. One of them, an elder named Kieran, had spent his entire life listening to footsteps, to breath, to silence. He said that all sound was just water trying to remember its way home. That morning, as he lifted a bucket to pour, he noticed the cloud above the ridge. It hung lower than the others, heavy and uncertain. "You are tired," he murmured, though no one heard him. Even the sky must rest. He set down the bucket and watched as the cloud drifted closer, its shadow crawling over the monastery's walls, cooling the stone. The other monks paused their sweeping and looked up too. For a moment, everyone stood still, sky and earth meeting in shared breath. The cloud lingered the whole morning. When the sun rose high, it moved just enough to cover the courtyard again, as if protecting the monks from the sharpness of day. They worked under its shade, their chants rising like incense curling into the quiet body above them. And though it did not yet rain, a faint dampness touched the air like memory returning to skin. Kieran felt it most. As he meditated in his small cell, he heard a low hum beneath the silence, the sound of something gathering itself. He remembered the teachings of his youth, that everything in the world, even a drop of dew, holds the wish to return. When you let go, his teacher had said, you do not fall, you arrive. The words echoed in him now, and he smiled. Above the cloud, circled lazily over the ridge, it could feel the pull from below, a whisper through the air that said, come down, come home. It did not understand the language, but it felt the kindness inside it. For the first time, the idea of falling did not seem frightening. It seemed like a song it almost remembered. By afternoon, the light shifted, the horizon blurred, and the edges of the cloud darkened, gathering depth. The wind that had carried it for so long began to fade, leaving it alone with its own weight. The world grew still. Birds stopped mid-flight, their wings cutting silent arcs through air too heavy to move. Inside the monastery, Kiran stood in the courtyard, face lifted to the changing sky. The first drop fell without ceremony, a single bead of water that struck the stone and disappeared. Then another, then 100. The monks looked up, laughter, breaking the quiet like bells. The cloud trembled, startled by its own giving. It had imagined falling would feel like breaking, but instead, it felt like returning to something vast and kind. Each drop that left it carried a memory of sunlight, of wind, of all the miles it had floated without rest. As the rain grew, the desert woke. Dust rose in silver ghosts, then settled into dark soil. The smell of earth, so long forgotten, spread through the air like prayer. Small plants unfurled their first green in years. The monks let the rain soak their robes. Their faces upturned, their mouths open to taste the sky. "This is what gratitude sounds like," said Kiran quietly. Above them, the cloud grew lighter with each drop. It did not vanish all at once. It thinned, softened, dissolved like a word repeated until only its meaning remained. When the last of it was gone, the sun returned low, and gold turning the wet stones into mirrors. The monks could see their reflections shimmering beside the reflected sky, both equally alive. That evening, as the light faded, Kiran sat on the steps of the monastery, the scent of wet dust still heavy around him. The riverbed below had filled with a thread of water, winding like a silver ribbon through the valley. The air was quiet, except for the drip of rain from the eaves. He closed his eyes and whispered, "Even the sky learns to let go." Night came slowly. Stars emerged, their reflections trembling in the new pools scattered across the sand. Somewhere far above, a new cloud was forming. Not from fear, not from wandering, but from the breath of the world itself, rising to begin again. The desert had learned the rhythm of the sky, and the sky had learned the patience of stone. In the days that followed, travelers crossing the plain spoke of the rain that had come from nowhere, gentle yet endless. They said the earth had drunk it like medicine, and the air now held a sweetness that made even silence taste different. Some believed it was a miracle. The monks did not. They said it was simply the sky remembering what it was made of. When the next dry season arrived, and the sun burned the horizon back to white, the memory of that rain did not fade. It stayed in the roots of the acacias, in the scent of the wind, in the coolness of the stones at dawn. Kiran would often sit by the same steps and watch the clouds pass. Sometimes, when one paused above the monastery, he would smile and lift his hand as if greeting an old friend. Years later, when Kiran's own breath grew shallow, the monks gathered around him. He looked out the window toward the horizon, where the faint line of a cloud was beginning to form. "Do not fear the falling," he whispered. "Every drop finds its sea." Then he closed his eyes, and his breath left him softly, like a final note dissolving into the sound of rain. Outside, the wind rose gently, carrying a thin mist through the courtyard. The monks opened the doors and let it enter cool against their faces. One of them looked up and saw that same small cloud, the one from long ago, hovering low above the ridge. It released a few drops, slow and deliberate, each one falling where Kiran's shadow lay. When the monks returned inside, they left the doors open. The air was damp, the floor shining. And though the rain soon stopped, the scent of it lingered for days, clean, calm, eternal. Travelers who came afterward said that the stones there never seemed entirely dry, as if they had learned how to hold a trace of sky. And so the legend grew of the cloud that fell softly, and of the man who taught it how. Some said the two had exchanged places, that his spirit rose into the sky, while the cloud descended to rest in the earth. But those who had been there knew better. They said nothing had been exchanged, only understood. Because in the end, the cloud had not fallen. It had finally found a way to arrive, and the desert, once silent and endless, now carried a new sound, the echo of rain that had learned to be gentle, and of silence that had learned to sing. The watchmakers, tea morning, always came quietly to the narrow street where the watchmaker lived. The first sound was not bird song, nor the creak of shutters, but the faint ticking that leaked through his window, a chorus of small hearts beating in unison. The shop was older than its owner, its sign faded, its shelves lined with clocks that had long ago forgotten their makers. The townspeople called him Master Rui, though he never thought of himself as a master of anything. He preferred to say he was a listener of time. He fixed watches, yes, but he also listened to their hesitations, their sighs, their uneven breaths. Each morning, before opening his door, Rui would brew a pot of tea. It was a simple ritual: 3 scoops of leaves, water just below boiling, and 5 minutes of silence. He never measured the time with a clock. He said the tea would tell him when it was ready. He poured it into a chipped porcelain cup and carried it to the small table by the window, where the first light of day brushed against the dust motes. There, among the stillness, he drank his tea and listened to the sound of the world waking, a cart rolling over cobblestones, a child calling for her mother, a bell from the church at the square marking an hour that no one seemed to own. The shop smelled of brass and rain. On the back wall, dozens of clocks ticked at once, but never perfectly together. Some ran a second fast, others a breath behind. Rui never corrected them all. If everything moved in perfect rhythm, he once told a customer, the world would be too still to live in. The customer had laughed, thinking it a joke, but Rui had meant it. He believed every clock carried its owner's heartbeat, the impatience, the hope, the fear of running out of something unnamed. He could tell by the rhythm alone when a man was lonely or when a woman missed her child. Time, he said, was not measured by numbers, but by tenderness. One afternoon, during the slow hours between noon and dusk, a girl entered the shop. She couldn't have been more than 12. Her hair braided her hands, clutching a small pocket watch. "It doesn't tick anymore," she said. Rui smiled and gestured to the stool across from him. "Let's listen." He opened the watch carefully, as if handling a small animal, and held it close to his ear. Nothing. He looked up. "How long has it been quiet?" "Since my father left," the girl said. "He said he'd come back when the watch ticked again." Rui nodded slowly. "Then we must wake it gently." He placed the watch on the table beside his teacup and began to work his hands, moving with patient precision. The girl watched as he adjusted the tiny gears, his brow furrowed, not with effort, but with reverence. After a while, he stopped and poured a cup of tea for her, too. "You must sit and breathe while I mend it," he said. "Watches can hear impatience." They sat together in silence, the scent of tea mingling with the faint tang of oil and brass. Outside, the wind brushed against the sign, making it creak like an old hinge remembering its song. Then from the table came a sound, soft, tentative, like the first word of a long-forgotten language tick. Then another talk. The girl's eyes widened. "You fixed it." Rui smiled. "I only reminded it to breathe." The girl returned many times after that. Sometimes her watch still ticked. Sometimes it had stopped again. She learned that not everything broken needed to be rushed back to working order. Some things just needed company. Rui taught her how to oil the hinges, how to wind the spring gently, how to listen for the faint click that meant the heart of the watch was alive. He never charged her. Instead, he said, "Bring me a story each time you come." And she did stories of her school, her mother's laughter, the sound of rain against their roof. Rui would listen as he brewed tea, each word steeping slowly in the room's warm air. Years passed. The girl grew older, and the watch aged with her. When she turned 18, she left the town to study in the city. Before she left, she visited Rui one last time. "I'll miss the tea," she said, "and the ticking." Rui poured her a final cup and smiled. "Time will follow you," he said. "Just remember to stop and pour it a drink now and then." After she left, the shop felt quieter than before. Rui grew older too. His hands, once steady, began to tremble slightly when he worked. Some days, he forgot which clock he was repairing. But he still brewed his tea, still sat by the window to watch light move through the dust. Sometimes, customers came only to sit with him, to listen to the ticking and breathe. They said it felt like resting inside a heartbeat that belonged to the world itself. One winter, the river that ran through the town froze solid. The air smelled of smoke and frost. Rui had begun leaving the door slightly open each morning, though few people came. One day, as the snow began to fall, a stranger entered a man in a dark coat, his face half hidden by a scarf. He placed a small clock on the counter. Its hands stopped at midnight. "Can you fix this?" he asked. Rui lifted it, examined it, then nodded. "It has waited a long time." The man hesitated. "It belonged to my father," he said. "He was a watchmaker, too." Rui looked up. "Then he has already fixed it," he said softly. The man frowned, unsure what he meant. Rui smiled faintly. Sometimes the silence is the repair. The man left the clock and promised to return. Rui placed it on the work table, but did not open it right away. Instead, he poured a cup of tea and sat. Snow pressed against the windows, muting the world. The ticking of the other clocks grew faint, as if listening too. When he finally opened the clock, he found inside a single, folded note, yellowed with age. On it was written, "Thank you for listening." That night, Rui dreamt of his shop, but it was empty of clocks. Instead, the air itself ticked softly, each breath a beat of time. In the dream, he poured tea into 2 cups, and across from him sat no one. Yet the steam from the 2nd cup rose as if shared. He woke with a calm heart. The next morning, the boy who once brought him stories, now a man, came to visit. He found the shop, still the tea kettle cool, and Rui seated by the window, his head bowed slightly as if mid-listen. The cup beside him was half full, steam long faded. In his lap rested the repaired clock, its hands pointing to dawn. The man did not cry. He simply sat beside him for a long while, until the ticking from the walls surrounded them both. Then he stood, poured himself tea, and took a slow sip. "Thank you," he whispered. The clock in Rui's lap ticked once more softly, as though answering. After the funeral, the townspeople decided to leave the shop as it was. No one could bring themselves to silence it. The clocks continued to tick, each with its own rhythm, filling the street with a music that never repeated. The window still caught the morning light, and on the table, the porcelain cups remained one chipped, one smooth. Travelers who passed through often paused by the door, drawn by the gentle ticking. Some said the sound made them think of their childhood, others of promises they had forgotten. Those who stayed long enough were always offered tea, poured by the apprentice who now kept the shop, the girl who had once brought Rui her broken watch. Her hair had turned silver at the edges, but her smile carried the same warmth. She would pour the tea, let the steam rise, and say, "It will be ready when it stops speaking." Sometimes, at dusk, she would hear something else. A faint laugh, the sound of a chair creaking near the window. A whisper that said, "There you are." She never turned around. She would simply nod, pour another cup, and place it across from her, letting it sit until the tea cooled. And if you walked by that little shop today, you might still hear it, the steady heartbeat of clocks, the soft exhale of steam, and the invisible thread that binds every moment that listens to every moment that passes. The tea still brews itself slowly. The dust still dances in the same shaft of morning light. The watchmaker is gone, but his silence remains steeped in the walls, in the ticking, in the warmth of every cup poured in patience. And if you ever find yourself inside, sitting at that table by the window, you might feel what everyone eventually feels there, that time is not the enemy, that stillness is not empty, and that somewhere in the soft ticking of 100 clocks, there is a kindness that says, "You are exactly on time." The bridge of leaves, At the far edge of a forest, where the trees leaned close enough to whisper into one another's branches, there was a small stream that cut the path in two. It wasn't deep. A child could cross it in a single leap, but its current was swift and clean, and in the early mornings, mist gathered above it like breath over glass. Every traveler who passed the forest had to pause there, not because of the water, but because of the quiet. The sound of that stream was not like other rivers. It had a tone that belonged to neither distance nor time. It was the sound of something beginning again endlessly. In a village nearby lived a boy named Leon. He was small, thin, and often seen with leaves tangled in his hair. His house stood at the edge of the forest, where the fields gave up their green to the darker color of shadow. His father was a woodcutter, his mother a weaver of baskets. They loved him in the way that simple people love, with work, with food, with gentle silence. Leon spent most of his days wandering by the stream, skipping stones, talking to the wind. He loved the sound the water made when it struck the roots of old trees. It reminded him of laughter. One autumn morning, a great storm came. It rolled in before dawn, dark and impatient. The rain fell, not in drops, but in ropes, tearing leaves from branches and sending them spinning into the stream. The wind howled so fiercely that the villagers barred their doors and waited for it to pass. When the storm was gone, the forest was littered with broken limbs, the air smelling of sap and sorrow, and the little bridge of wood that crossed the stream, the one the villagers had used for years, was gone, carried away by the flood. The adults sighed, already planning to rebuild. But for days, no one did. The current was too strong, the water too restless. And so, until the wood could be replaced, the two halves of the forest stood apart, watching each other across the bright running line of the stream. Leon went to the water's edge that evening. He crouched, looking at the current carrying bits of bark and reeds downstream. Above the stream, hundreds of leaves floated and turned, yellow, red, brown, each spinning like a slow clock. He picked up one of them and let it rest on his palm. It trembled slightly, as though unsure whether to stay or go. He whispered to it, "Don't worry. I'll find you a way across." That night, he gathered more leaves, some wide, some small, some veined like old hands, and laid them carefully across the water, one after another. They floated for a while, then drifted apart. He tried again the next day and the next, weaving the leaves together with thin strands of grass, then reeds, then bark. The water kept undoing his work. But he did not stop. Each day, he returned his fingers stained with green, his hair filled with the smell of the forest. The villagers laughed at first. The boy thinks he can bridge a river with autumn, they said. But Leon didn't mind. He wasn't trying to build something strong. He was trying to build something gentle. He began to notice that each morning, a few of the leaves from his bridge still remained caught on roots and stones, fluttering like small flags of hope. He thought of them as messengers, proof that the forest could still speak to itself across the divide. As the days passed, the air grew colder. Frost clung to the edges of the water. The last leaves of the season fell spinning slowly through the gray light. One evening, as the sun was sinking and the world was made of silver and smoke, Leon saw an old monk walking along the stream. The man stopped beside him and watched him work. "What are you doing, child?" he asked. "I'm helping the forest talk to itself," Leon said, without looking up. The monk smiled. "And what does it say?" Leon thought for a moment. "It says it misses its other half." The monk nodded. He looked at the stream, the half-made bridge of leaves trembling on its surface. Then he said, "Even a leaf can cross the river if it stops trying to stay dry." Leon didn't understand, but the words stayed with him. That night, he dreamed of the forest, breathing the two halves, leaning toward each other, their branches stretching across the stream like hands trying to meet. He woke before dawn, his heart thudding softly like the sound of water against stone. When morning came, he went back to the stream. The frost had grown thicker and the air was still. He knelt and began his work again. This time, not to build something that would last, but to build something that could disappear beautifully. He wove the leaves together, loosely, leaving spaces between them, letting the current move through instead of against. The stream accepted his offering. The bridge shimmered half there and half gone like a reflection. As the sun rose, the frost melted and the leaves began to move downstream, still clinging to each other. The bridge broke apart, but the pieces drifted together in the current, reforming and dissolving, reforming and dissolving, as if practicing the art of reunion. Leon smiled. He realized he had not failed. He had simply learned what the monk had meant, that to connect was not to hold, but to flow. By the next season, the villagers had rebuilt the bridge with wood and nails. It was sturdy, useful, ordinary. People crossed it daily, thinking little of it. But those who walked there at dusk sometimes noticed that the water beneath it carried leaves that moved differently, not tumbling, not spinning, but gliding, as if remembering a pattern. The villagers would pause, puzzled by the strange peace in the sight, and then move on, not knowing that the pattern came from the boy's small hands and the patience of the river. Leon grew older. He still visited the stream, though he no longer built bridges. He learned to listen instead to the rustle of leaves, the murmur of water, the creak of the wooden bridge above. The world had its own quiet crossings, he thought. When he was grown, he became a teacher in the village, and sometimes he brought his students to the water's edge. He would tell them, "Everything you love is already touching everything else. You just can't see it because it's moving." Years later, when Leon's hair had turned white and the river had carved itself deeper into the earth, he returned one last time. It was autumn again. The forest glowed gunter and red. He stood on the bridge the villagers had rebuilt and looked down. The water shimmered with leaves, hundreds of them, gliding downstream. He smiled. The river was still speaking. That evening, as the sun folded itself into the hills, Leon sat by the bank and brewed tea over a small fire. The steam curled upward, joining the mist. He felt the years slide through him like water, not gone, just moving on. He whispered to the stream, "Thank you for teaching me how to fall." A few days later, the villagers found his teacup beside the water, half full, still warm. The wooden bridge stood unshaken, the leaves drifting quietly below. They said he must have slipped, though there were no signs of struggle, no broken reeds, no footprints leading away. The only thing they found was a small wreath of woven leaves floating downstream, holding its shape even as it turned the bend and vanished from sight. Since that day, every autumn, the river fills with leaves more than any other time of year. They travel together, touching edge to edge, glowing in the fading light. Those who stand by the water and listen swear they can hear laughter in the current, soft and familiar. They call it the Bridge of Leaves, though there is no bridge there anymore. And sometimes, if the wind is gentle and the world is quiet, the leaves seem to pause midstream, forming a line so perfect it almost looks still. In that moment, the forest is whole again. Two halves leaning toward each other, joined not by wood or stone, but by the memory of a boy who once believed that even the smallest thing could carry the weight of connection. And perhaps he was right. Because the river still hums, the leaves still drift, and somewhere beneath the sound of running water, you can hear another sound, softer, older, the sound of everything, learning over and over again how to meet. The quiet path. Night descended slowly over the valley, not as darkness, but as a soft deepening of tone, as though the day itself had exhaled after holding its breath too long. The last light lingered on the ridge, folded into the mist that rose from the fields, and the air turned silver, not cold, not warm, only calm. Along a narrow dirt road that wound between the trees, an old traveler walked alone. He carried no pack, no lantern, only a wooden staff polished smooth by years of hands. His name had long since become unnecessary. He had walked so far that it had worn away like a carving on a stone left too long in the rain. He had once believed that he was going somewhere, a temple perhaps, or a village beyond the hills where answers waited like unopened letters. But over the years, the distance between where he was and where he was going had thinned until the two began to blur. Now he walked not to arrive, but to listen. Each step was an exhale, each pause an inhale. The world seemed to breathe with him. The road bent along a stream that whispered through the dark. Fireflies drifted above it like lost embers, and frogs stitched the silence with their small, patient calls. The traveler stopped and looked down at the water. The moon lay there, broken by ripples, and he smiled. Even light needs to learn how to bend, he thought. He knelt, cupped his hands, and drank. The water tasted of rain and distance. He continued until he reached a clearing where an abandoned shrine stood, a simple wooden frame with a roof of moss and a bell that no longer rang. He sat beside it, placing his staff across his knees. The wind moved through the grass in long, deliberate sighs. Somewhere far off, an owl called its sound, falling through the night, like a pebble through water. He closed his eyes. In the darkness behind them, faces began to gather, people he had met and forgotten, places he had passed without naming, seasons that had come and gone. Each appeared only for a moment before fading like breath on glass. He did not try to hold them. Memory, he had learned, was not something to collect, but something to release. The quieter he became, the more the world spoke, not in words, but in small, generous gestures. The shifting of air, the scent of pine, the warmth that remained in the soil long after the sun had left. When he opened his eyes again, the moon had risen higher. Its light fell across the path, turning it pale and soft as milk. He could see where the road continued disappearing between two dark hills. He wondered briefly if he should go on. Then he realized that on was only a direction invented by the mind. the path did not end. It only changed shape. From somewhere deep within the forest came the sound of running water, not the thin voice of a stream, but the low murmur of a river. He followed it, drawn by its rhythm. The trees thickened, the ground sloped gently downward, and soon he reached the riverbank. The water shone faintly in the moonlight, moving slow and heavy as breath in sleep. Across the surface drifted leaves, their reflections turning with them, each carrying a fragment of sky. He sat on a smooth stone and watched them pass. For a long time, he did nothing. The river made its own kind of prayer, one that required no listener. He thought of all the miles he had walked, mountains, cities, plains, and how each had changed him in ways he could never describe. Somewhere along the way, his longing for answers had become something quieter, not understanding, but acceptance. He reached into his pocket and drew out a small object, a stone worn flat and smooth. He had picked it up years ago beside a lake whose name he no longer remembered. It had been in his pocket ever since, though he had often forgotten it was there. Now holding it, he realized he could not recall why he had kept it. He smiled and placed it gently into the river. The current took it without hesitation, as if welcoming home an old friend. The night grew deeper. The stars brightened each one, a quiet pulse in the dark. The traveler lay back on the earth and looked up at them. There was no story in their arrangement, no map, only presence. He thought of something his teacher had once said: "The path is not what you walk upon. The path is what walks within you." He understood now. The road, the river, the forest they had never been, destinations, but mirrors. They reflected the movement of his own, becoming the slow turning of his heart toward stillness. At some point, he fell asleep. When he awoke, the horizon was soft with dawn. Mist clung to the river, and birds were beginning to stir in the trees. He rose slowly, stretching the stiffness from his limbs. The world smelled of wet earth and new beginnings. He felt no urgency to move. The path would wait. It always did. He sat once more beside the shrine and brewed tea from leaves he carried in a small pouch. The water from the river was cold and clean. As the steam rose from the cup, it curled into the air and disappeared, joining the morning mist. He watched it go and thought, even disappearing is a kind of staying. When he finally stood to leave, the light had changed. The forest shimmered with that fragile brightness that exists only in the first hour of day, when everything seems to be remembering its name. He placed his palm on the trunk of a nearby tree, feeling the slow heartbeat beneath the bark. "Thank you," he said, though he did not know to whom. He walked on. The path wound gently upward out of the valley. The grass brushed against his legs, wet with dew. The world seemed to hum quietly, as if keeping rhythm with his steps. He noticed how every sound bird wind, footfall, rose and faded in perfect timing, like breaths in a single invisible body. He realized that he was not walking through the world. He was walking with it. By midday, the path opened onto a high ridge. Below, he could see the valley he had come from the river, winding like a silver thread, the small shrine by its edge, the fields unfolding beyond. He stood there for a long time, watching the light move across the land. It struck him that every place he had ever been was still within him, layered like rings inside a tree. Each step had written itself quietly into the grain of his being. Nothing was lost. A breeze rose, tugging at his robes. He turned his face into it and closed his eyes. The air smelled of pine and sun-warmed stone. He let the wind pass through him, unresisted, and in that moment, he felt the strange, simple truth of his journey. There was nowhere left to go, because he had never been apart from where he sought to arrive. The path, the traveler, the wind, they were not three things, but one movement, one breath. When he opened his eyes again, the light had softened. Clouds were gathering in the distance, their undersides glowing with gold. He smiled. The road ahead curved out of sight, as it always had. He adjusted his grip on the staff and began to walk again, not toward, not away, but with. As he moved down the slope, he hummed a melody, without words, something the river had taught him. It rose and fell with his steps, blending into the sound of the wind. The forest opened, then closed, the light shifting through leaves like memory through time. Each step was both departure and arrival. Each breath, a bridge. By dusk, the path led him to another valley, another stream, another quiet place waiting to be seen. He paused at the water's edge and knelt, watching his reflection ripple and dissolve. The surface shimmered for a moment, then stilled. He saw not his face, but the sky, endless, patient, unchanged. He whispered, "This is enough." And somewhere, deep in the forest, perhaps in the air itself, the world whispered back, "Yes." The night folded around him like an old friend's arms. He set his staff beside him, sat upon the ground, and let the silence take shape. It was not the silence of emptiness, but of fullness, of everything returning to itself. The moon rose, casting a pale bridge across the water. and he watched it until his eyes grew heavy. When morning came, the path was empty. The dew clung to the grass where he had sat, and a single footprint remained by the stream. The forest was still. The shrine bell, long silent, trembled once in the breeze, releasing a sound so light it could have been imagined. Those who passed by in later years said the valley always felt different, softer, as if someone had walked through and left peace behind. They began to call the road that wound through it the quiet path. Travelers who followed it found that their thoughts grew slower, their hearts less restless. Some said they heard footsteps beside them, though no one was there. Others said that at night, if you stopped and listened, the wind spoke in a low, steady rhythm, a rhythm that sounded almost like breathing. And perhaps it was, because some paths do not end when the traveler leaves them. They go on walking through everyone who finds them, whispering the same small lesson in 100 languages, that you do not need to hurry, that you are already home, that peace is not a place you reach, but the quiet that rises when you finally stop trying to arrive. And now, as the final story comes to a close, as the breaths of the night grow slower and softer, you may feel that even the sounds outside are fading away, leaving only your heartbeat and a quietness that gently expands within the room. The 10 stories we've walked through were not just tales, but slow steps along the quiet path. A place where the weight of the day can be set down, where your breath rediscovers its rhythm, and where the soul, after all its wanderings, finally comes home to rest. If your heart feels a little lighter now, your breath a little deeper, or sleep is drawing closer, then tonight's journey is already complete. Meditation is not about forcing stillness, but allowing stillness to be. Not about going anywhere, but returning to this very moment. Thank you for staying until the end, for walking with me through these gentle hours. If these stories have brought you a touch of peace, a small light, or simply a softer breath amid life's noise, please subscribe so that we may meet again in the next quiet night, where each story will become a new breath, a calm note of the soul. May your sleep be deep and peaceful. Until we meet again on the quiet path, where every step leads back to peace.